The third dimension is one dimension above chaos. It's where we find meaning, purpose, perspective, right? But we find it from a chaotic flow. So we have divine chaos, which is way higher. But second dimension to third dimensional transit is about finding some form of meaning. So we start out in the second dimension as a meaningless being, meaning that we don't know our own meaning. It's not that we don't have meaning, so we don't know it. Third dimension is about the discovery of that. It's the thing that actually sets us apart and allows consciousness to grow as something that is separate and acknowledges itself within itself. The problem is that in the third dimension, we're not able to really tap in because telepathic nature starts in the fourth dimension. So you don't really have the intuition and the support in the third dimension. So it leads to a pretty rough journey, to say the least. Now, your fourth dimension is where you start to step into intuition, capability. It's the dimension of analyzation, though. So it's when the mind becomes more active at the same time. So that's really fun, right? Because the mind is the tool, it's not the driver. But for the longest time, we believe that it's the driver as long as we're a fourth dimensional being. And so we actually surrender to our mind and we go on all kinds of fun tangents and rides, which usually ends up poorly, and we back in the third dimension to try to find meaning again because we messed up somehow in our minds. Because our minds love to tell us that we messed up. Our minds also don't know how to work with the future. They can only program based on the past. And this is important. So as long as you're a fourth dimensional being, you're going to be focusing on your past over your present and your future. And so the loop begins to become when you start into the fifth dimensional, because the fifth dimension and the third dimension are intrinsically tied together. As long as your meaning is outside of yourself, you're never going to understand the fifth dimension. As long as your meaning is outside of yourself, you're never going to understand the fifth dimension. That's really important to understand because most fourth dimensional people look at and analyze everything outside of themselves versus looking at what's actually going on inside themselves as the projector of reality itself. And this is where fifth dimensional perspective shifts. The fifth dimension is where we touch infinite time. Touching infinite time means that we now have time as a circle instead of a line, and everything changes from here. So from the fifth dimension, we go to the sixth dimension, which is divine chaos. So we revisit our lower games from a higher perspective, and we start to see the world differently. And this is important because in this point, we can actually reference things without identifying as that thing. So now we're no longer analyzing, we're observing. Okay? So that's your sixth dimensional perspective. Your seventh dimensional perspective is my favorite. It's called divine order. It's where you can actually sit with the entire world and everything that's going on and see the rhythms and the order and the times that create the perfect alignment of everything, even if once it looked chaotic. And the best example of that is look at nature. Watch anything, like go into a real forest and just sit for an hour and watch it. It will look chaotic AF if you're chaotic. But if you start to meditate, you'll start to see how everything has a purpose and a place and it's all perfectly aligned. And there's nothing out of ordinary except for you. And it's really fascinating because nature will let you know that very fast. It will be inquisitive. It will literally, birds will like land next to you and start looking at you and like, wait, why are you here? What do you play? I don't understand. And then like as you get up into the higher games, into the eighth dimension, you'll notice that nature will literally work with you, not question you, because in that existence you are an infinite being. So the reason that source seeds are taking the eighth dimension and not higher, which it's totally available. I have other technology in my room right now that's sitting at 12th dimension, which is super fun. But the eighth dimension and no higher is because the whole purpose of the eighth dimension is to touch infinite time with the mastery that is, right? So the whole purpose of the source seed is to give us the opportunity to have infinite mastery, but then for us to evolve into that stage versus us being catapulted out, because the eighth dimension is like the end of the circle. The ninth dimension becomes more complex, 10th dimension becomes more complex, 11th dimension more complex, and it's like being rocketed out.
Okay, so they are like perspectives that you experience still in reality.
Dimensional consciousness is very different than solid state reality or dimensional reality, as the world talks about, like where they talk about space and time and all those other things, right? Like those are great, but those are dimensions of physicality. They're not the
Mhm.
same thing as consciousness. Consciousness is the key. If that was an eighth dimensional reality, seed, it would do all kinds of weird things that would make zero sense. Like, no, we would probably die touching it, to be honest. But to imbue and to share and to level them up to a consciousness, which by the way, I hand code those, is to bring the opportunity for a new evaluation. And the reason why nature loves them so much is because nature is currently sitting in a fifth dimension. And with an eighth dimensional ally, now they can touch infinite time and they can literally create resources where there weren't any before. Just like the quantum field, right? Catching on. So the eighth dimension is where we start to really touch the quantum field. Fifth dimension, we can acknowledge it, but we don't really get to play in it until we hit the eighth dimension. So providing an eighth dimensional ally actually allows us to begin to learn from that self or that greater aspect. That's why trees grow so much faster with source seeds. It's because they're getting provided the opportunity in the lesson as necessary to support them. But it's also a choice, which is why we plant them under the roots instead of on the roots.